There came a piercing wail from the far side of the door where Linda was peering through the keyhole. It was loud enough to penetrate the music. "You have got my spider! Spid! Oh, my darling Spid, what have they done to you? Oh, Mum! Norman has got my spider!" Linda's cries died away. Her footsteps retreated, and the group came to an abrupt halt. "Time we left," Norman said tersely. "If she fetches Mum, there could be trouble. Let's get down to the disco and practice there." In less than no time, bicycles were pulled out of the shadows, instruments hurled into boxes and bags. Spid was gently introduced into a cardboard container and tied onto a bicycle carrier. The whole group left the shed at a gallop and hurled themselves down the street, pedalling madly. Rather breathless, but not unduly worried, Spid travelled with them, winding in his coloured thread as he went. Their destination was a kind of sports hall a mile or two away. It was dimly illumined, but already another group of boys was there, tinkering with coloured lights. They were not pleased at the early arrival of Norman's group, but became interested when the story was unfolded and Spid was displayed. For the next half hour, he was the centre of attention, as light after light was tried out and played upon him. His portrait was being hastily pinned onto a large poster destined to replace the one already hanging up outside, which announced to the public, "Satellites play tonight. Meet Spid, the dancing star spider." And there he was in the middle of it, 20 times larger than life. "I am the dancing star spider," said Spid to himself, very well satisfied. He tried not to think about Grandpa, still sitting in his chair by the lake, in the dark perhaps. "But I couldn't help it," Spid thought, "any more than it was my fault that Linda cried. She should never have dressed me up in those silly doll's clothes," he said to himself angrily. "I just wish Auntie Blossie's boy could see me now." The lights were fixed and everybody trooped out to get hamburgers before the evening show. Spid was left in Norman's guitar case, but gradually he became aware that he too was hungry, very hungry. Norman had not thought of closing the case. After all, Spid was part of the group now. Anyone could see he did not want to leave them. "You take a good rest before we begin, old mate," Norman said. "Shan't be long." "Okay, pal," said Spid, curling up for a sleep. But hunger woke him. The thought of the boys stuffing themselves with hamburgers while he was starving was more than he could bear. He wriggled out of the case and began to look about him. The hall looked quite hopeful. In fact, very. There was plenty of dust round the windows and in the beams of the ceiling. Where there was dust, there were flies. Flies alive, flies gone to sleep for the winter, flies waking up for the summer. But yummy, yummy flies. Within 10 minutes, Spid was so full of flies he could hardly move. But still, he went on eating. It was hard to stop when there were so many of them and they were so succulent. Finally, he crept back to the guitar case and lay there, gently hiccuping till he went to sleep. He was awakened by Norman's voice. "Why, Spid, you are filthy. What have you been doing to yourself?" It had not occurred to Spid that his fly hunting in the darkest parts of the disco hall might spoil his bright colours and scratch his paint. Each of his 8 legs was more tarnished than the last. He had lost his sparkle. The web that had been so splendidly decorated was now broken in 3 places. He had intended to mend it before the boys came back, but instead he had fallen asleep. Shame made him appear more dingy still. He half closed his eyes and looked resentfully at Norman. "Spid, are you ill?" Norman cried in alarm. The other boys clustered around. "He does look off colour," said the one called David. "Get a vet," somebody suggested. Norman made an angry exclamation. "His feet are all dirty too. Spid, where have you been? Have you been out of the case randying around? How could you, Spid? You're our star." Spid cringed into the back of the case. It was quite true that in his hunting further, he had forgotten for the moment how important he was. "I was hungry," he muttered. "Ugh!" "Well, why didn't you say so?" cried Norman in despair. "We'd have bought you a hamburger, and now all the kids are arriving and it's too late." "I don't want a hamburger," Spid murmured. "Ugh!" "He's got the hiccups," some of the boys said, greatly amused. "Come on, let's get going. Here's Sue dance it off." But Spid was suffering from such painful indigestion that for a long time he could not even leave his case. The grand opening that Norman had planned with Spid, slowly descending his thread in a blaze of coloured lights in the centre of the stage, had to be postponed until he felt well enough to creep out, by which time nearly all the rest of his luminous paint had been rubbed off in his writhings and groanings. "Come on, Spid," Norman said impatiently. "It's time you got on with it. The kids want to know if there really is a spider. Put a match to it." Spid staggered out, his stomach aching and rumbling. He climbed up the wall and across the ceiling to the centre of the stage, where he let himself down on a long, warm thread. The coloured lights picked him out, and the young people on the floor of the hall shouted and waved. But the glory of the spectacle fell flat. The thread was no longer bright with fluorescent paint. The spider did not glitter and sparkle. To the audience, it was still quite a feature. All the lights were focused on the swinging body and its 8 waving legs. The rest of the hall was in perfect darkness. But to Norman and the rest of the group, who knew what the full effect should have been, it was an anticlimax. And they began to play their opening number in a spirit of sulky indignation. At least they thought Spid would now come to life and display his remarkable antics, so that the veiled jeering and a few scornful remarks among the audience would be quenched, and then they would see what the spider group could do. But Spid did not come to life. He hung there from his threads like a dead weight on a disused bell pull. Now and again his frame was shaken by a giant hiccup and his 8 legs trembled. He was so afraid of being sick that he dared not dance or even wriggle. He simply closed his eyes and hung there waiting until after a long, long time, the music stopped. The lights were switched off and the hall electricity came on again. Norman stretched up, broke the thread and stuffed Spid into the guitar case, closing the lid. "I guess we're back again to the satellites," he told the group. Chapter 15, The Sponsored Spin. On Monday morning, Norman met Henry in the playground and thrust an envelope into his hands. "Here's your rotten spider," he said fiercely. "I never want to see it again. It let down my group, and now we are the laughing stock of the district. Don't you let my sister Linda see it, because she'll have it off you if you do. And if it comes back to our place, I swear I'll squash it." "Thank you," stammered Henry in astonishment. He had never expected to see Spid again. When Grandpa's loud cries had been heard at last in the park, he had been rescued by the park keeper and had related an angry story about going into the park with Spid and being deserted by him when a little girl with curly hair came along and enticed him away. "Left me," Grandpa kept repeating. "Left me flat. No feelings, no manners, no consideration, the great hairy brute." Henry now felt at liberty to display Spid at school, where he soon became almost famous. Norman was no longer a threat, and even Linda knew that her brother meant what he said. If Spid came into the house again, he intended to squash him, and very reluctantly she gave up the idea of having him for a pet. Everyone had become very animal-minded since the headmaster announced that it was Animal Week and special efforts were to be made to support the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. "I think that is a first-rate idea," said Spid approvingly. "And the first rule to announce is that I'm not a pet. I'm a spider in my own right." "There doesn't seem much point in announcing that," Henry said, rather provoked by Spid's attitude. "After all, nobody's hurting you by calling you a pet." "It's my feelings is hurt," returned Spid. "They all think I'm just a simple spider, but I'll show them I'm not. I'll spin the biggest spider's web in all the world, and then they'll know the kind of person I really am." And so the idea of the giant sponsored spider's web was born. Henry and his friends asked all their friends and relations to sponsor the number of circles Spid could spin in 12 hours of daylight. Norman pretended not to be interested, but he hung about the playground watching Spid's activities until Henry asked him to keep a list of the sponsors, after which he became really enthusiastic and rushed round the school and the neighbourhood, badgering and bullying people for their sponsorships and persuading them to give more than they intended to afford. His sister Linda, who had spent all her pocket money, was in the depths of distress until her mother rescued her and promised to pay 3d a circle in Linda's name when the web was completed. Henry's mother promised the same, and his father promised 5d. Auntie Bloss offered 2d, and Grandpa flatly refused to pay anything at all. "Throwing away your money on that miserable spider," he said contemptuously. "It will start off like a racetrack and leave off in the middle. You see if I'm not right." Spid glowered at him from the edge of Henry's pocket. "Then you wouldn't have to pay so much, Grandpa," Henry encouraged him. "I wouldn't pay a penny," Grandpa announced. "But I'll tell you what I will do. If the little rascal actually builds a web that we can all see, well, I'll think again." Not even Norman could persuade him to make a better offer, and Henry had to be content with that. The final spot was chosen. The web was to hang in the playground on the wall of the gymnasium facing west, so that it would not be too hot for Spid to spin during the heat of the day. Excitement was rising as at last the day was fixed. Even the headmaster was taking a keen interest, and the school secretary had made a poster to hang on the wall next to the cobweb. It announced, "A sponsored giant spider web will be spun on Friday the 18th of June in aid of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. The spinning will take place between the hours of 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. All sponsorships must be in by 7:30 p.m. on the previous evening." Meanwhile, Henry was putting Spid into training. He had him racing up and down drain pipes, waste pipes, even chimneys, and rigorously darting his intake of flies. "Remember the disco," he warned him. "You don't want to let everybody down, do you? Especially the animals. If you finish the web, there will be all that money coming into the fund, and you will be the most famous spider in England." "Oh, I'll finish it all right," said Spid peevishly, "just as long as nobody interferes with me. No coloured lights and things. Don't mind a little music." Norman and his satellites were persuaded to come and play for Spid during the hours when they were not in school. They were a little reluctant till they found that Spid was in earnest and that the sponsored web had actually been his own idea. Henry put Spid to bed early on the night before the spin. After a last series of press-ups on the bedroom floor, the day promised to be fine. Most people aimed to be in the playground by 8 a.m. to start him off. A few of the dads were there on their way to work. Most of the mothers were absent since it was their busy hour, but they had promised to look in during the day and to be there for the finish. "If there is a proper finish," Henry said anxiously, because 12 hours It's a terribly long time to go on spinning. He can rest, said Norman. He hasn't got to spin without stopping all day long. I know, Henry agreed. Only if he doesn't make enough circles, the money won't come in. And he does mean to make a lot of circles. I shall too, Spid said, flexing his 8 legs one after another. The morning broke fine and free. There was hardly a breath of wind, while a faint mist promised sunshine later. It was a cobweb morning, which Henry took for a good omen. Thousands of tiny spiders had painted their innocent webs across the grass in a vast counterpane of glistening silver. Henry trod lightly across the grass. He did not like the idea of crushing all those little spids, but Spid himself was quite indifferent. Where once he had tried to sweep them away, now he took no notice whatever, but peered ahead, clinging to the flap of Henry's pocket, his eyes on the gate of the playground, his thoughts on the height of the wall he was going to cover. Other children were hurrying up the road. Quite a large crowd gathered round the gymnasium wall, waiting for the headmaster to arrive and start off the contest. He came on a motor bicycle just 5 minutes before 8 o'clock. As the school clock struck 8, Spid climbed out of Henry's pocket and raced to the wall. Up he climbed, his 8 legs flashing, his furry feet clutching at the roughness of the bricks and forcing him on. Halfway up the wall he stopped, turned to face the crowd and waved 1 or 2 legs in salutation. Then he began to spin. The first circles were so small that 5 or 6 were formed very quickly. Round and round went Spid, and by the time school started, the giant cobweb was well and truly underway. He did not notice the good lucks and warm greetings thrown to him over their shoulders as the children trooped into school. The dads had long since departed and would not be seen again until evening. It was hard for anyone to concentrate in school until the headmaster, touring the classrooms, announced that anyone doing a good piece of work would be allowed out of class 5 minutes early. After that, some splendid exercises were sent in, and only a few children remained sniffing until the playtime bell. Spid had not wasted his time. The web, though still small, was visible halfway across the yard, but the children's attention was diverted from Spid by a hooting and shouting from the lane outside the school grounds, where several tradesmen's vans were gathered in a bunch. They were prevented from entering the school drive by a thick rope, quite obviously spun by Spid, on which dangled a page torn from an exercise book. Across the page was scrawled in scrambly capitals, "Sportship in progress. No entry on business. Keep out." The drivers were rattling and banging at the gate, which was tied up with webs as tough and as strong as wire. When they saw the children, they made an even louder noise, and everybody ran over to see what they were shouting about. "We can't get in. Fetch the boss," the men shouted. "It's our dinner they've got there," said Norman accusingly. "And it's your rotten spider again, Henry. Why can't he mind his own business?" "I am minding my own business," said Spid, joining them at the gate. "It's them that didn't. They came snooping over the yard and disturbing my work, and—" "Hi," said Norman, seizing the occasion to enlist some more sponsors. He turned to the tradesmen and began to bargain with them. 2 children fetched wheelbarrows. The goods were loaded onto the barrows and rushed to the kitchens, while the drivers, tiptoeing as close as they dared to Spid's cobweb, watched him take up the thread where he had left off, and readily promised to add their money to the rest if he had really covered the wall by the end of the day. "We'll let the press know," they promised, driving away, "and we'll be back for the finish." "There," Henry encouraged Spid. "You'll be in the newspapers now, and you'll like that, won't you?" "Yes," said Spid, "but I'm getting rather tired of spinning." "Oh, Spid," all the children moaned, "you've only just begun. Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Would you like a fly? One dead fly and one tiny drink of water, Henry commanded. Go on, Spid. You know you can spin for hours. Think of the animals. Don't like animals, retorted Spid. He dropped to the ground and lay there motionless, looking like a twisted up elastic band. The situation was saved by Norman's satellite group, who came racing over from the bicycle shed and began to play at full strength. In no time, Spid was up the wall again and jiggling and jogging to the tune. Everybody cheered, and 15 circles could be counted on the web, each one bigger than the last, and joined to its neighbour by a ladder of little silver bars. It's beautiful, said all the little girls. That's right, Spid agreed cheerfully. Go it, fella, you're great, shouted the boys above the playing of the satellites. The bell shrilled for the end of playtime. Now, don't you give up while we're gone, Henry told Spid. We'll be back at dinner time. More music, another fly. 2 flies, said Spid. All right, 2 little flies. Only don't stop spinning, will you? Promise? It's hard work, grumbled Spid. Dinner hour came, an hour's break, and this time the whole school turned out to admire the giant cobweb, which was beginning at last to be worthy of its name. Quite half of the wall was covered with silver threads, and 20 circles, now becoming enormous, crept outwards from the centre, where for the moment Spid was taking a nap. He came to life when the admiring audience arrived and began to scuttle round the outside of his web, spinning madly as if he had never left off. Poor little mite, said one of the kitchen staff. It seems a shame to expect all that much from one little creature. Spid was so grateful to her, he dropped off the wall and ran to kiss her feet, causing chaos as the whole of the kitchen staff ran back to the kitchen screaming. Oh, Spid, you should have had more sense, Henry scolded as he picked up the spider and put him back on the web. Spid sulked for a moment and then set to work again, spurred on by the crowd's admiration and the turning up of the satellites, who were prepared to play all through their lunch hour, taking it in turns to go to dinner. By the end of the lunch hour, Spid had developed new courage and determination. His sulkiness was gone. His legs fairly galloped round the great web. All the morning's apathy had vanished. He hardly seemed to notice the satellites, nor turn his head when the bell rang, and they had to stop playing and go into school. His jiggling had stopped a long time ago. It was as if he needed every ounce of strength for his spinning, and he did not even pause to talk to Henry. By 3:30, the web was enormous. Spid was working more slowly now, climbing round the outside and dragging his long silver thread behind him. One after another, the knots were tied and the little bars were fixed. The outer circle slowly grew. There were 50 circles now, and although each one took longer and longer to spin, the whole web was a formidable display of craftsmanship and creative art. The headmaster said as much when school was over. He came out to inspect Spid's masterpiece. A real piece of creative art, he pronounced. You want to take it easy now, old man, he said to Spid. We'll all come back and look at it at 8 o'clock and pay our dues. I've told the press, and the mayor is coming, and I've no doubt there will be some television coverage. I don't know how many circles you have made, but there must be well over 50. I'm going to make 100, said Spid grimly, toiling away. No more music, thank you. I can only give my attention to one thing at a time. I've got to the stage where I must be left alone to work in peace. Well done, said the headmaster. Goodbye, old chap. We'll see you later. Goodbye, sir, said Spid politely. He waved an aching leg and went on spinning. Reluctantly, Henry went home to tea. Clouds gathered and the sun went out of the sky. Spid was quite relieved, for the afternoon had been very hot. Now all his attention was on the great web. He was almost awed by his own effort. Never in his life, nor in the lives of his ancestors, had he imagined seeing such a beautiful cobweb. He hoped that the headmaster would cover it with a sheet of glass when it was finished and keep it on the wall of the gymnasium forever with his name, Spid, underneath it. But it had got to be 100 circles wide for the sake of history and the Guinness Book of Records, from which Henry was always quoting. The biggest spider web ever spun, Spid murmured to himself, was 100 circles wide, spun by a spider called Spid in the year 1985 and sponsored by over 200 people. It was spun in aid of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and raised a magnificent sum of... Spid could not work out how much money the web would raise if he achieved his 100 circles. A low rumble of thunder made him jump. Spid hated thunderstorms. They reverberated down the drains and washed spiders down strange waste pipes. Time was racing on. It was nearly 7 o'clock, and what would become of the giant web if he left it to the mercy of the thunderstorm? A spiteful little wind came gusting across the playground and whistled round the corner of the school, raising the cobweb like a sheet on a clothesline and slapping it back against the wall. Spid gave a shriek and flew to tether the loose ends. Another gust like that and his precious work would be ruined. Feverishly, he tied down the ends and mended 2 or 3 of the strands that had parted. Another gust of wind arrived, and another portion of the web was raised up, tugging at the wall as if it wanted to free itself and fly away like some great, enormous flying carpet. Spid raced across the middle of the web and tied it down, while suddenly the heavens opened, and down came the rain in a solid sheet. Spid was almost grateful to see it. He knew his web would support quite a lot of water, and now that the rain was falling, there was not so much wind. And within minutes, the playground was full of children, led by Henry, children with umbrellas, children with ground sheets, children with macintoshes. They surrounded Spid with a wall of defence against a storm, except that the rain was falling straight down from the sky, and there was no way of covering the gymnasium wall. But the giant web held fast against the rain, every bar and cross thread sparkling with silver drops. It was an even more beautiful sight than before the thunderstorm, and round it the children clustered, splashing with their gumboots in the puddles, encouraging and praising Spid, who worked feverishly to finish the last few circles before time ran out. The grown-ups began to arrive, chasing their children, but the storm was moving away. As the black clouds vanished, the sun came out again. Henry's parents arrived, and Mrs. Gridley and Auntie Bloss, and most unexpectedly, Grandpa, in a taxi. Henry rushed to find him a chair and sat him down quite close to Spid, where he could see what was going on. 97, 98, said Grandpa, looking at his watch. You never do it. Spid was very tired. The clock on the school gable announced 10 minutes to 8, and the last circle was hardly begun. The satellites were playing madly to encourage him. The whole school was yelling his name. Henry, close to Spid's side, was shouting encouragement and trembling with excitement as he urged him on. Is the press here? Panted Spid. Yes. Oh, yes, said Henry, one eye on the reporters writing in little notebooks. And the television, whispered Spid. Yes. No. Yes. Oh, I don't think so. Oh, yes, here they are, cried Henry in great relief as the television van rattled in through the gate. Spid made a final effort and spun the last 6 inches of the giant web just before the clock struck 8. The children went on cheering for quite 5 minutes. Meanwhile, the press were questioning Henry, and the television people took a sequence that they had nearly missed through being late. Spid took quite a lot of persuading to climb the wall again and pretend to be spinning some more thread. "But don't you want to be seen on television?" Henry urged him. Spid did, and presently the press and the television people went away, and Norman began to collect the money from the various sponsors. When he came to Grandpa, the old man put his hand in his pocket and brought out a £5 note. "That's my spider," Grandpa said. "I knew he'd do it." Norman regretted giving Spid back to Henry, but the satellite group had been noticed by the press and all their names taken for the papers. After all, you couldn't have everything. The hero of the day was asleep, utterly exhausted in Henry's pocket, having earned £350 for the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. "I'll sign autographs in the morning," he told Henry. And that's where I'm leaving it.